Tonight, somewhere in the world, a child will wake up screaming from a nightmare they can't describe. They won't be able to explain what scared them. They won't have words for it. They'll just know with absolute certainty that something in the dark was coming for them. Their parents will say it's just a phase, a childhood fear, something they'll grow out of. They're wrong, because that child isn't imagining something, they're remembering something. Something so old it predates language, predates civilization, predates the entire history of human culture. They're feeling an alarm that evolution spent 3 million years building. And here's the thing that nobody tells you about the fear of the dark. The humans who didn't feel it, they died. Let's start with a fact that should be deeply uncomfortable. Of all the large mammals on Earth, humans are among the most defenseless in complete darkness. A leopard can see in light 7 times dimmer than what a human eye requires. Lions can detect movement in near total blackness. Hyenas have night vision that makes them as effective in the dark as they are in broad daylight. African wild dogs coordinate complex hunts in darkness that would render a human completely blind. Every apex predator that shared the African savanna with our ancestors for millions of years had evolved specifically to operate in the hours when humans could not see. This was not a coincidence. Darkness was the hunting window. And for the vast majority of human evolution, every night was a calculated gamble between sleeping and not waking up. Researchers studying mortality patterns in pre-industrial hunter-gatherer societies, the closest living approximation to how our ancestors lived, found something that stopped them cold. Predator attacks on humans cluster with striking consistency in a specific time window, between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. The dark hours, the sleeping hours. Your ancestors didn't fear the dark because it was unfamiliar or mysterious. They feared it because the data, written in bones and blood across millions of years, said the same thing every single night. The dark kills. But here's what makes this more than just a survival story. Because at some point in human prehistory, something shifted. Something changed the relationship between humans and the night in a way that no other species had ever experienced. And that change didn't make the fear go away. It did something far more interesting. It turned the fear into a tool. To understand how, we have to go back to the very beginning of what fear actually is. When a threat enters your environment, when a shadow moves wrong, when a sound doesn't belong, when something in the peripheral dark changes shape, your amygdala fires before your conscious mind has registered anything. Before you have a thought, before you have a word, the alarm goes off at the neurological level, flooding your bloodstream with adrenaline, sharpening your hearing, dilating your pupils, tensing your muscles for either explosion or stillness. This is not a psychological response, it is a biological one, and it operates on a timeline that conscious reasoning cannot match. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux spent decades mapping the fear circuit in the human brain. What he found was that the brain has 2 pathways for processing threats. The first is slow. It routes sensory information through the cortex, where it gets analyzed, contextualized, and understood. The second is fast. It bypasses conscious processing entirely and fires the fear response before the thinking brain has even received the information. Ledoux called this the low road. In complete darkness, the low road is the only road, because there's nothing for the cortex to analyze. No visible shape, no identifiable form, just the absence of information, which the brain, wired by millions of years of experience, interprets as the worst possible signal. What you can't see might be anything. And in the African savanna, anything was usually something that wanted to kill you. But then something strange happened in the research. Scientists studying fear responses across different cultures expected to find that fear of the dark was culturally learned, that it would appear in some societies and not others, depending on what stories children were told, what superstitions their culture had developed, how darkness was framed in their mythology. What they found instead was universal. Every culture studied, every continent sampled, every population examined. Isolated hunter-gatherer groups with no contact with the outside world, indigenous communities in remote jungles, industrialized Western populations surrounded by electric light, all showed the same neurological response to complete darkness. The fear was not learned, it was installed. Stanford researcher Robert Sapolsky, studying the biology of human behavior, documented that the stress hormones cortisol and adrenaline spike measurably in humans exposed to complete darkness, even when the subjects intellectually know they are in a safe environment. Even when they can hear familiar voices, even when they know exactly where they are and that no threat is present. The body doesn't care what the mind knows, because the body was built in a world where the mind's reassurances had no survival value whatsoever. A leopard didn't care that you felt logically safe. What happened next shocked researchers even more, because when they began studying exactly what ancient humans heard, smelled, and sensed during the dark hours on the African savanna, reconstructing the sensory environment of our ancestors' nights, they found something that recontextualized the fear of darkness entirely. It wasn't just predators. The dark was loud. The African night is one of the most acoustically complex environments on Earth. Insects, frogs, birds, and mammals produce a constant, layered wall of sound that changes its character dramatically as the night deepens. And embedded in that wall of sound, threading through it unpredictably, are the sounds of predators moving. A leopard in long grass is nearly silent, but not completely. A lion 400 meters away is invisible in darkness, but its breathing, its footfalls, the subtle displacement of insects around its movement. These leave acoustic signatures letters in the night that a trained ear can read. Our ancestors had trained ears. Paleontologist Richard Wrangham at Harvard, studying the evolution of human nighttime behavior, found evidence that early humans developed extraordinarily refined sensory processing specifically for the dark hours. Not better night vision. That was a biological arms race they couldn't win against the cats. But better hearing, better pattern recognition for sound, better ability to extract meaning from incomplete acoustic information. The fear of darkness, it turns out, wasn't just an emotional response. It was a sensory upgrade. Animals that are afraid pay more attention. They process information more carefully. They make fewer errors in threat assessment. The heightened state of awareness that the dark produced in our ancestors wasn't just a side effect of fear. It was the entire point. But here's the paradox that researchers struggled to explain for years. If darkness was so consistently lethal, if the fear was so universal and so deeply wired, if our ancestors were genuinely defenseless against the predators that hunted them at night, why didn't they evolve better night vision? It's a reasonable question, and the answer, when researchers found it, turned out to be one of the most consequential discoveries in the study of human evolution. They didn't need to, because somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million years ago, depending on which archaeological evidence you accept, early humans did something no other species had ever done. They tamed fire. And fire did not just provide warmth. It did not just enable cooking, which reshaped human biology in dozens of ways. Fire did something far more specific and far more profound in the context of the dark. It moved the boundary. Before fire, darkness began at the edge of the last available light, wherever the sun's angle fell below visibility. After fire, darkness began wherever humans chose to put it. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, a prey animal could define its own perimeter of safety, could push the dark back, could sit at the center of a circle of light that predators, with their instinctive fear of open flame, would not cross. Anthropologist Wiessner, studying the social effects of firelight among the Jew/Hwansi people of Botswana, documented something extraordinary. The conversations that happened around fire at night were qualitatively different from daytime conversations. They were longer. They were more emotionally complex. They involved storytelling, myth-making, social bonding, at a depth that daytime interactions didn't reach. Fire didn't just protect the body from the dark, it created space for something to grow inside the dark. And here's where the story becomes genuinely strange. Because the fear of darkness didn't disappear when fire arrived. It didn't diminish when humans built walls or when they invented artificial light or when they moved into cities where true darkness no longer exists. It persisted. Psychologist Arne Ohman at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm spent decades studying what he called prepared fears. Fears that humans acquire faster, hold longer, and extinguish more slowly than other conditioned responses. Fear of snakes, fear of spiders, fear of heights, and fear of darkness. Ohman found that these fears share a specific neurological signature. They don't require traumatic experience to develop. Children who have never been frightened in the dark still show elevated anxiety responses to it. They resist extinction. Even after extensive reassurance, the fear response returns. And they are cross-culturally universal. No amount of cultural reassurance eliminates the underlying neurological pattern. These are not learned fears. They are evolutionary memories. The darkness that your brain responds to tonight is not the darkness of your apartment or your bedroom. It is the darkness of the African savanna 300,000 years ago. It is the darkness where something with better eyes than yours was already awake and moving. Your brain doesn't know that you live in a building with locks and alarms. It doesn't know that the electricity will still be on in the morning. It knows only what 100,000 generations taught it. In the dark, something can reach you before you can see it coming. But the deepest revelation, the one that changes how you understand not just fear but human nature itself, isn't about the danger. It's about what humans built inside the danger. Because every culture that has ever existed has responded to darkness, not just with fear but with story. The oldest myths in human history are night myths, gods of darkness, monsters that come after sunset, spirits that move in the space between the last light and the first. Every ancient civilization on every continent developed elaborate cosmologies specifically to explain and contain the dark, to give shape to what the eye could not see, to put names on the forces that moved in it. Anthropologist David Lewis Williams, studying the origins of prehistoric cave art, found that the caves used for the earliest known human paintings, chauvet, lascaux, altamira, were not casual campsites. They were deep. They required carrying fire into absolute darkness. The deepest chambers, farthest from the entrance, farthest from any natural light, contained the most elaborate and significant images. The most important art our ancestors made was created in the darkest places they could find. Why? Lewis Williams' research suggested that the sensory deprivation of deep cave darkness, combined with the altered state that firelight and rhythmic activity can produce, may have triggered visionary states in the artists. That the darkness itself was the creative medium. That the fear, pushed to its edge, transformed into something else. Not just dread, but transcendence. The same darkness that carried death carried vision. The same hours that could end a life were also the hours when humans told each other who they were, where they came from, and what the universe meant. So why were ancient humans so afraid of the dark? Because the dark deserved it. Because for millions of years, the hours between sunset and sunrise were genuinely, measurably, statistically more likely to kill you than any other time in the human experience. The fear wasn't irrational. It was the most rational response to the most accurate threat assessment the human nervous system could make. But here is what the research ultimately reveals. The thing that stays with you long after the data is put away. The humans who survived the dark were not the ones who were unafraid. They were the ones who used the fear, who let it sharpen their hearing, who let it drive them toward the fire, who let it pull them into the circle of other people, into the warmth, into the stories that made the darkness manageable. Every person alive today is descended from someone who was afraid of the dark, who felt that same cold pull of unease when the light failed and the sounds of the night shifted. Who chose the fire? Who chose the group? Who chose the story over the silence? The fear living in you right now, the one that tightens in your chest when the lights go out unexpectedly, when you hear something in the dark you can't identify, when the ancient alarm in your nervous system fires before your thinking brain can stop it. That fear kept your ancestors alive every single night for 3 million years. You are here because they were afraid, and the fear worked.